At Westminster, Chris Huhne's resignation meant a small reshuffle of Lib Dem ministers. But what will be the impact on the wider public and on Lib Dems in the country, where the grassroots play a particularly important role? I asked Mark Pack, a leading Lib Dem activist, and pollster Tom Nojinsky from Ipsos Mori. I asked Tom how the affair was likely to play with the ever-sceptical voters.
To be honest with you, I mean, the public have a very low view of politicians anyway, so it's really not going to surprise them. And it's not Liberal politicians, it's not Conservative Labour. It's generally a bad view of politicians altogether. They're at around 12% in the polls now, probably a bit lower than their usual position in the polls in between elections, so they don't have that much further to slip. But this is unlikely to affect them in national polling. They're just not getting any of the credit for being in government, which is something that they were hoping that would happen once they did actually enter government.
Mark, couldn't it have really happened at a worse time, given that you are so low in the polls, your party?
Probably the low point for the party was last spring, around the time of the AV referendum and the May local elections. And if you look at polls and council by-elections and so on, since then, there has been a slow, gradual recovery. Still a long way to go for that recovery, certainly, but there has been a recovery. And I think, as Tom says, actually, although understandably the Chris Huhne news has been all over the headlines, actually it is pretty much the sort of thing that people expect to hear about politicians now and again. So I think it's unlikely to have much an effect on the Liberal Democrats specifically.
Now, the Lib Dems have been publicly rallying round Chris Huhne to a great extent, but what are the grassroots saying? What are they really saying about it?
It's worth remembering that what has happened in the news is that Chris Huhne is being charged with an offence. He's not yet been found guilty, and it's important to remember that distinction. Absolutely right that he has resigned, because that's what politicians in other circumstances have been required to do, and you can't really do a job while you're also up in court. So a lot of people are quite rightly holding fire, saying, well, let's see what comes out in court, whether he was really telling the truth or not, see what the courts decide. It's also the case that his replacement, Ed Davey, is somebody who has been increasingly popular with party members. Liberal Democrat Voice regularly surveys party members to say what do they think of different Liberal Democrat ministers, and Ed is one of the ministers whose ratings have increased most sharply over the last year. So seeing him in place to replace Chris, I think, is a very good move in terms of keeping party members happy.
Chris Huhne is sometimes been seen as a fairly divisive figure, though, has he not? I mean, he stood for the leadership. He is said to leak things, to brief things. He's not seen as a team player.
Chris Huhne certainly isn't sort of flavour of the month with Tory politicians. Within the Liberal Democrats, he's actually pretty popular because that rumbustious nature of his is directed outwards rather than internally. As far as, defeated leadership candidates of any political party goes, actually Chris Huhne's record was one of the most impressively loyal.
Tom, are there any poll results for how Chris Huhne is seen generally? Any sort of feeling as how the public sees him?
No, we haven't polled about Chris Huhne specifically, but I think it's fair to say that, in fact, most people probably don't know who Chris Huhne is. And that's probably true of most of the Cabinet, aside from the Prime Minister, possibly now the Deputy Prime Minister and the Chancellor even. Very few people know who Cabinet members are.
They might know who he is now, of course. Do you think that there might be some chance of people feeling a little bit sympathetic towards him, given that it was only a speeding offence originally that's created the allegations?
I really can't see any sympathy coming for Chris Huhne. I mean, although interestingly, we sort of dug up some records in a few years ago. 12% of UK drivers said that they would ask a relative to take speeding points for them if they faced a ban. But sympathy for a politician is almost unheard of, I'd say.
Mark, what about the public generally? I mean, there's just been a whole slew of things that have undermined the public's trust in politicians. The expenses scandal being the most obvious, people actually being convicted and sent to prison. And, OK, he, of course, is innocent until he's found guilty, but now another cabinet minister is going to be prosecuted. I mean, the public really must just think, how can you trust any of them?
Well, I think if you look at, and forgive me, Tom, for quoting some polling from a different polling organisation, if you look at the polling done for the Committee on Standards in Public Life that was carried out last year, it showed actually quite a strong rebound in public levels of trust in politicians. So much so that when asked about how much they trusted their local MP compared to how much do they trust a journalist, local MPs came out as being more trusted. Perhaps it's a little cynical to suggest there may have been a bit of self-interest in the media in not reporting that now they've been overtaken by MPs in levels of trust. But it does show how these things do go up and down in reaction to events, and it's not simply always trust falling in MPs.
Tom, does it really go up and down? I thought journalists were pretty low as well as MPs.
Journalists are just above MPs in terms of being trusted by the public, but there's an interesting distinction about politicians generally, and if you say your local MP, for example. So people are far more trusting and more positive about their local MP rather than politicians in general.
What about trust?
Trust
is there a new low, or is it?
Yeah, it's very low. It's around 14% of the public trust politicians to tell the truth, and as I say, it's the lowest of our list of professions. Even bankers are higher than that.
Tom Leginsky and Mark Pack.
Chris Huhne says he'll fight to prove his innocence after being charged with perverting the course of justice. It's alleged the former Energy Secretary tried to avoid a driving ban by asking his now ex-wife, Vicky Pryce, to accept speeding points on his behalf. Mr Huhne has quit the front bench to focus on the trial. Ed Davey has been named as his replacement. Mark Pack is editor of the blog Lib Dem Voice. I asked him whether he thinks Mr Huhne has done the right thing.
Absolutely. I think it's very important to remember that he has been charged with a crime rather than having been convicted, and he's absolutely due the innocent until proven guilty sort of right that anyone would expect. But in practice, it's completely impractical to do a high-pressure job like being a member of the cabinet whilst also facing a court case.
It's impractical, but also embarrassing for the Lib Dems as well, isn't it?
It's certainly unfortunate. For better or for worse, I mean, all of the main political parties, indeed the minor political parties as well, do suffer these sorts of issues from time to time. So I don't think there's anything particularly Liberal Democrat about it. And obviously, the way the reshuffle has now been conducted very sort of quickly and bringing in and promoting some very popular and well-respected people, I think means the government and the Liberal Democrats in general will be able to sort of get stuck back into work fairly efficiently on Monday morning.
What about the personal effect on Nick Clegg, though? Is this not a personal blow for him? He's described him as a very good friend.
I'm sure that Nick Clegg would have rather not to have to make a reshuffle under these sorts of circumstances, but that's part of politics. You do encounter events which require people to be moved in or moved out of jobs, and that's just the normal part of politics that people are quite used to.
What about the Tories? I presume they won't be that sad to see Chris Huhne go, particularly George Osborne.
I think it's a pretty fair bet that Chris Huhne isn't high up too many Tory MPs' Christmas card lists, and I'm sure, in amongst the appropriate sort of comments about the fact that we shouldn't prejudge the outcome of the court case, a few Tories will be quietly quite pleased. But one of the reasons Chris Huhne has been very respected is not just for his sort of partisan approach on some issues, but also the fact that he's helped deliver really important policies like the creation of the Green Investment Bank.
Yes, lots of his colleagues have described him as very well respected. Can he recover from this and get back to where he was?
It all hinges on the outcome of the court case, of course. I think if he's convicted in that court case, then clearly his political career will be well and truly over. On the other hand, if he's acquitted, I suspect he will get a significant degree of public sympathy because he'll be acquitted in circumstances where an estranged wife has tried to do him in and then has turned out to be making false allegations. So if he is acquitted, I think there's certainly a road back for him to a political career in the future.
So tell us a bit more about Ed Davey. What's he like as a politician? How will he get on in Cabinet?
On the Liberal Democrat Voice website, we regularly poll party members to ask them what they think of different Liberal Democrat ministers, and Ed is one of the ministers whose ratings in those surveys has increased most sharply over the last year. So he's very much seen as somebody who's had a successful time as a minister, both getting to grips with the administrative side of the job, but also managing to deliver quite a lot of important Liberal Democrat policies, particularly putting an end to post office closures, but also introducing some very positive policies for mutuals and cooperatives. So I think a lot of Liberal Democrat members and activists who I've been speaking to in the last 24 hours are very pleased to see that Ed Davey has been promoted, and also very confident that given his record, he will be able to do a very good job in a very important role at DEC. He's got a very different personal style from Chris, but he's absolutely no pushover. He's a very firm and determined person.
That was Mark Pack from the blog Lib Dem Voice.